Hi, Rich Hoffman here. So let's talk about birth rates and why the birth rates need to be up. Why I think there needs to be more families with a mom and a dad in them, and why kids, the production of kids needs to be more than two, probably 3 or 4 per family. And we probably should get back to a culture that produces large families with 6 or 7 or 8 children in the family, because we need it as a human culture. And without dispute, and I've talked about it a lot of people have been talking about it, there's been this hate human movement, the worship of nature at the expense of humankind, and the desire of some of those types of people who want to eradicate humans. They see them as a virus to nature. So they don't want a high birth rate, and they've been looking for ways to discourage it. So you have hidden in all that this anti-family movement that has been really corrosive to the construction of families, and discouraging people to be in marriage unions and to produce children in that fashion, and then to raise them as a family, as opposed to having babies and then turn them over to the state to raise. So we need to get back to the classic way of producing a family. And people say, well, what does that mean? Because then you have kind of an awkward position of having to explain elements of the Bible that have long been in contention, and everybody kind of glazes over them. Because a lot of the founding fathers especially in the Old Testament, had multiple spouses. For instance, there's a lot of sex in the family of Jacob, who eventually Joshua comes from there, and then that becomes the captive in Egypt, and the 12 tribes, the 12 children of Jacob. One woman didn't make all those children. And I've heard a lot of references to like Elon Musk these days, and he very much is a proponent of having as many kids as you could possibly have. And then Trump's on his 3rd wife, and he's got kids by all kinds of different women. And is that immoral? And I will say this. I very much believe in the classic version of marriage, which is a separate thing from the production of a family. So the troubadours in France kind of took us in a direction of this idea of romantic love, where you didn't have arranged marriages, where a father would groom his daughter and sell her off as a bride to somebody who seemed like a suitable person. You still had that going on in the Near East and Middle East and India and China to this very day. Arranged marriages were very common. Same thing you saw in classic European cultures. Women didn't get to pick who they wanted to stay with. They were told who they were going to be with. So marriage and the application of a sexual union was not their choice. And the troubadours came along and came up with this idea of romantic love, where you could pick your person and choose your own destiny. So you could have this life soulmate type idea that was very new, and it emerged from Christian thinking, but it took several hundred years to get there, 1,000 years really, to emerge into that. But going back into the Old Testament, women didn't have much of an opportunity. Their primary function was to produce children that would make their that would give their husband a representative, and that was their value. So in the case of Jacob, he really, there's a story of the well, and he fell in love with Rachel, very beautiful young woman. But Rachel had an older sister named Leah, and he didn't know about it. Jacob just liked the younger one. That's the only one he met. And she went home and told her family about this great guy she met at the well. And in comes Jacob, and he's talking to the dad about, marrying Rachel. And the dad's like, hey, I want to get my daughters attached to somebody who is somewhat reliable. So you work for me for 7 years, and I'll give Rachel I'll give her your hand, or I'll turn it over to you at the end of that duration. So Jacob works as a slave to earn the right to have the hand of Rachel. But the father tricks Jacob, and he dresses up his older daughter, who's having a hard time finding somebody to marry, which is an increasingly common problem, which is why we're talking about this. And he's so desperate to give her away to somebody reliable that he tricks Jacob. He puts the veil on her. They go off to consummate the marriage. And of course, it's dark, and Jacob doesn't realize it's not Rachel. It's her older sister, Leah. And he's very upset when the light comes on, the sun comes up, and he sees, hey, you're not Rachel. You're her sister. And there's a lot of scheming that goes on, and that becomes problematic. So then he goes to the father and complains about it, and the father says, well, okay, take my oldest daughter, but work for me 7 more years and you can have Rachel, my youngest daughter. So Jacob goes and does 7 more years, 14 years working for this guy, getting pretty much free labor, just so he can win the hand of Rachel. And he ends up with 2 wives instead of just 1. And the father gets to get his daughters lined up with a decent person. And now they're about to produce children and have a family, and there's multiple spouses. And you see that with these polygamous cults even to this day. Even the talk about Mormons having multiple wives, and why they even have it, why that's a thing, and should it be a thing, and is it immoral? So all through the Bible you have this kind of thing going on. And King Solomon had multiple wives, and King David had multiple sexual interests over a period of time, and morality really wasn't covered in that respect, because the emphasis was on producing children. The goal, you find a woman, and you make a lot of children out of that, as much as you can from that woman. And if you need more children than that, you get multiple women, because women take a long time to have a baby, and you need to have constant kettles filled with food to grow into something for a good dinner. Is one way to look at it. When you cook on a stove, you don't cook with just one burner. Usually, if you're cooking for a big group, you have multiple burners going. So you have this issue in the Bible where a lot of these foundation men had multiple spouses. But clearly, Jacob loved Rachel a lot more than Leah. She was kind of a scorned. She was always looked at as a trick. Obviously, there was lots of sex going on, because Leah gave Jacob lots of children, where Rachel did not. She was barren. She couldn't have children. And then Rachel, because she felt bad, she wanted to have children of her own, she used her handmaiden, because each sister had a handmaiden. So Jacob ended up with 2 concubines through his wives that he was also having relations with and producing children with. And out of those 4 people became the 12 tribes of Israel. So an interesting take on that, because God eventually felt sorry for Rachel and opened her womb, and then she was able to start producing children to Jacob. And there goes a complicated relationship, and that's just 2 wives and 2 concubines. And you can look around to this day and you can say, well, President Trump had 3 wives and all these kids, and Elon Musk has many women producing many children all over the place. And so what's the moral order? And do we establish our moral order on 1 wife and the family you can produce out of that 1 woman? And that becomes less of a Bible thing and more of a troubadour thing, where you have this idea of separating and not having to have arranged marriages to go back and fix the problem with Rachel. Jacob should have been able to pick the one he wanted. She should be able to pick who she wanted, and which is a troubadour idea. And they could have picked each other and lived happily ever after with all these complicated social necessities. The social expectations would cause the multiple marriages, because there wasn't a lot of good guys out there for the father of these 2 daughters to give his daughters away to. He liked Jacob. Thought Jacob was a hard worker, and made him work hard for the hand of his daughters, even though he tricked him. And God was apparently okay with all this stuff. The reason this is important now is because now there's a lot of people out there that are confused about how to handle it. You have a younger generation that's experimenting with kind of the same kind of issue. There's just not enough men to go around for all the women that want to have babies. And now they're starting to think about non-traditional family structure relationships. And I think that's a sad situation, because the idea of romantic love, building a family, is a very noble idea that it took a long time to evolve into. And when you go back to some of those Old Testament ideas of building families, where the sole function was to find a good woman that could produce children, and the woman was valued for how many children she could produce, that was the value system. And if you want to have a big family, you had to have multiple wives, so that someone's always carrying a baby that could be produced and increase your holdings in the world with future generations of children. And that we need to be thinking about ways to have more babies in the world. And the solution has been, going back to the Old Testament, that multiple women are looking for the same guy. And that's an increasing trend that you see on like Instagram and some of these social media platforms, where women are throwing in the towel the idea of having romantic troubadour type love, romantic soulmate love, and they just want to be part of a structured family that's healthy, at least healthy psychologically, maybe not how beds are shared. And that's a denigrating idea that we have, that's going against the contours of the family destruction that has been imposed through progressive society. And the desire is the opposite of that, without the romantic troubadour type of tradition of choice and independence. People want to have babies, they want to have large families, and they're looking for insulation against the social constraints that have been imposed on them to prevent them from real happiness. And so they're responding in a way to say, I want to have babies, and I'm giving up hope that there's any good men out there. There's very few men, and if I have to share a good man with multiple women, I'm willing to do it so I can have at least the opportunity to get some of that DNA from that good man, and be in a family structure that might make some sense compared to what I came from. And that's the net result of a society torn asunder by horrendous progressive laws and legislation that has caused this mess in the first place. And then when you say, well, let's get back to the traditional ideas of marriage, then of course this idea of polygamy comes up, and as a way to throw out the whole concept of building a family in the first place. But you have to understand that over time, the value systems were radically different, and individual merit is something that was born out of the Christian idea, biblical understanding, where people could then pick a spouse and not have a father tricking a man so he can offload his two daughters onto someone he thought might provide a decent living for him, because he couldn't look after him for the rest of his life. So he wanted two daughters to marry the same guy, a guy that was willing to work 14 years for him, and be honorable about it. There's just not enough out there. We've had a culture that's produced a lot of bad guys, and I don't blame women at all for throwing in the towel in hopes of looking for one. But I would say, don't give up on the idea of what the troubadours nobly brought forth, which is this idea that in Western culture that you can choose who you want to marry. You don't get it arranged by some family to have some family or economic relationship, or some relationship to the state. You can choose. If you found somebody that you personally like and enjoy and want to spend the rest of your life with, you can pick it for yourself. And I think that's the lesson. That's where we need to be headed. And when you do find that union, you shouldn't hold back. Have as many babies as you possibly want to or can, and build a nice, healthy, happy life, and make family the centerpiece of everything you do. I think the world would be a whole lot better off. And the Bible's a good foundation for that mentality. Without the Bible, I don't think the troubadours would have ever existed, because it's a progression of thought over time. And in the context of that, we have to understand what it is we're trying to achieve, which are good families, lots of great children, raised in a safe environment where parental influences are something that kids can trust. And kids at least should have that much. Anyway, it's Rich Hoffman here. Share, subscribe, make tomorrow a better day. If you haven't read my book, The Gunfighter's Guide to Business, I think you'll love it. Anyway, have a good day. See you later.